Way
Got,
cool.
got it. Tom Schin, we are live on Thursdays with Culture Talk. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. It's sunny and supposed to be 80 something degrees, but I like being down in the office on really warm days.
Yeah.
But excited to be here. It's a good time to have conversations about culture.
Absolutely. And before we dive in, I want to take a moment and welcome anyone that's tuning in now or in the future. My name is Cynthia Forstman. I'm one of the co-founders of Culture Talk, and you will catch on the Culture Talk LinkedIn page and on our YouTube page all sorts of videos and conversations that we're having with people that work in the area of workplace culture. If you're new to Culture Talk, just real quick, we're a system, a platform that allows consultants, coaches, and in-house trainers to take this very vague concept of culture and turn it into something tangible. And we do that through assessment systems and through a framework of human story. So that's kind of our genesis. And around that, we have built a whole network of people that are taking the concepts into their businesses to help organizations solve all kinds of problems. So if you tune in on a regular basis, you'll hear us talking about everything from DEI, which we talked about last week, to branding, to mergers and acquisitions, to leadership development, to communications, all of these different angles that are part of how employees and how stakeholders outside an organization experience this idea of culture. And tonight, it's 9 a.m. in Denver, which is where I'm dialed in from.
I'm going to bring my tequila bottle back into the picture.
Whoops. I was telling Tom, I got a surprise invite last night to Stevie Nicks at Red Rock. So I stayed up later than I normally do. And it was awesome. But this morning in Denver, it's also a gorgeous day. But I'm excited to welcome to Thursdays with Culture Talk, Tom Schin. So let me tell you, we promoted this conversation calling it culture as the ultimate recruiting advantage. And we know, and Tom, you're going to help us delve into that recruiting is it's like such an angsty topic today because we're in the midst of post-pandemic, great resignation, total reevaluation for people about what they want to do in their work and in their careers. And I know you're going to help us tie some things together, but I first want to just tell people a little bit about you. Tom has sort of a dual career going on. He is the director of talent acquisition partnerships and recruiting consulting services at Allant Workforce Solutions. And that's Tom, is it based in Albany, New York?
Yeah, we're based in Albany, right here in the Capital District of New York State. Probably about 3 hours north of New York City, 3 hours west of Boston, 4 hours west of Buffalo, and 3 hours south of Montreal. So nice spot in terms of 4 different giant cities and being in the state seat.
Cool. And I just learned, I looked at the Allant website and I was saying to you, gosh, it's really impressive how well recognized your firm is in terms of being a great place to work, being a top recruiting firm. And I noted that Forbes has selected you as one of America's top recruiting firms for 5 years in a row. So that's impressive.
Yeah.
Also, Tom is the founder of Build Better Culture. And that's a consultancy where he focuses on leadership, team development, employee engagement. We're going to talk about some of that. And I think you'll hear a lot more about Tom and his experience as we get going here. But let me start by asking Tom for you to share with us a little bit about how you got where you are and your journey there.
Let's see. I started with a mullet in high school and then realized that was a bad idea and shifted directions. That's the comic relief version of how I got here is by accident. I think from the recruitment side of things, I started in this area 15, 17 years ago, and it was completely by accident. I was on the hunt for something new and exciting, and a friend of mine connected to me to now a mutual acquaintance, of course, he handed me a post-it. He's like, I don't have time for you today. Call this woman. And I called that woman when I left that office, and she interviewed me on the spot, interviewed me again, connected me with somebody else who's now one of my oldest and dearest friends, Bev Knapp, out in the Oswego area. And the industry fit. So I've stayed in there the entire time. And along the way, uh, you got to see different organizations do different things. And my interest in leadership development and management trends and how you treat people blossomed. And so in came the idea to start Build Better Culture. And part of that I'll blame on your sister, Teresa, because long ago we had participated in a group together for several years. And she was always talking about archetypes and the storylines and so on and forth, so forth. And I was hooked. I'm like, I have to be part of this at some point. So every so often she'd be like, you ready, Tom? You ready, Tom? You ready, Tom? And finally, a couple of years back, I said, all right, I'm in. Let's go. And so that's where Build Better Culture started.
Yeah. And I know I want to delve into that, but let me start with the recruiting arena, right? So I know you also get out and speak a lot in the area about kind of, you're on the front lines of, companies are coming to you because they have an open position, and you're getting to experience firsthand kind of the angst and what's happening. So tell us, like, what's been the last couple of years? What have the last couple of years been like for HR teams and other people who own positions that need to be filled? What's going on for them today?
I think there's a sense of being overwhelmed. There's a lot on the HR person's plate, even more so on the small business owner, because there you have somebody who's not necessarily an HR professional. They haven't been trained on, even if you take the paperwork side in terms of the I-9s and the W-4s and the W-2s and all the documentation in terms of what you can have on an application, having an employment attorney as somebody that you utilize for a service and so forth. When you get into the HR realm, it's usually at companies 50 and above where you have a dedicated trained HR professional administering stuff. But you add into the realm back in March of 2020, all this COVID paperwork, making sure that folks have that just was a maelstrom, if you will, of additional compliance that you had to follow and all the rules and stuff that happen through state legislatures and the federal government that you have to do, right? Talk to your employment attorneys. That's not me. That's their world. There's a lot to have to remember and understand. And the HR practitioners, it seems things just get added and added and added. And when there's something else in the company that doesn't funnel into sales, marketing, production, etc., company events, well, let's give it to HR. Employee anniversaries, let's give it to HR. Any sort of extra thing, COVID included, let's give it to HR. And I know that's overgeneralizing, but their plates have just gotten fuller and fuller and fuller. And so what you've seen over the last several years, it hasn't just been since the pandemic, but you've seen these people and culture leaders start to develop at certain organizations, and certainly it's a size piece. And now more recently, you see a lot of more chief diversity officer and diversity roles, which is fantastic. Long overdue. HR offices have always been a bit understaffed when you think about ratios of leadership to people, but they got a lot. I have so much respect for folks that are doing this 70 hours a week, if you will.
Well, and I'm thinking about, I know we talked earlier this week and you were sharing that you gave a keynote this week, and your goal with the keynote was to give these HR teams some hope, because, out of things that are heavy, what kind of good emerges, right? So there's things shifting in terms of hiring. In particular, Teresa, even though she's on vacation this week, which I forgot to mention, she did send me an article yesterday from Entrepreneur Magazine because she knew we'd be talking. And the title of it is, what if a fast food restaurant paid $17 an hour? And without going into all the detail about this particular Chick-fil-A franchise owner who did decide to raise the living wage up to $17 an hour. I just want to read you some of the industry stats, right? Because this is the other kind of stuff that's weighty on it and on HR persons, even if they're not in the fast food industry. But there is a report by Black Box Intelligence and Snagajob that cited 144% turnover among hourly wage earners since June 2021, and 70% more job vacancies. Workers' wages have jumped 10%, an average of 10%. And they quote McDonald's raising the wage to 15, and now this franchise owner to 17. I mean, I think all of these things point to recruiting has been a big challenge in every industry, and the Great Resignation has been a big challenge. So, what kind of hope are you putting out there for people that are looking to hire?
I think, to the entry level wage piece, like you talk about a Chick-fil-A offering $17 an hour. I'm not going to get into the economics of it all, but raising those wage rates for the entry level worker has been long overdue. Like here in New York State, it's been adding and adding and adding the last several years, but I can even remember it being $11.10 an hour. And there was, even though the federal minimum wage was at $7.25 or $7.50 an hour. And I had to imagine, how can somebody survive on that level of income? If you want somebody to stay in a job, you have to do more. And that was part of the message that I gave in my keynote, is doing more. And yes, when you do more, you have to take stuff off your plate. And then I was going to tie back in. I think of my mother, patron saint, martyr, right? Will just take on anything. You need her to do something. She could be falling apart at the seams. She's going to do it. That's HR, right? We take extra things. And I have long subscribed to this notion, and I'll circle back to your question, that and in order to take something else on, something else has to go. You have to delegate or push back or reprioritize to say, look, you want me to spend an hour a week on this, 10 hours a week on this. Those hours don't magically appear. They don't appear in any industry, especially in HR, when haphazard random things fall on your desk. But, when it comes to looking at the recruitment challenges, there are people that want to work. What's come to light these last 2 years is people now know and feel confident saying, I've got choices. I don't need to accept $12 an hour or $14 an hour or even $17 an hour. Somebody's going to pay me the $17, $18, $19, $20 an hour or to do the job, whether they're in my backyard or across the country or even outside of the country. The remote landscape of being able to do things has opened up a whole field of opportunity for everyone. And so people have always asked me when I go to networking functions, they're like, where are all the employees? How come nobody wants to work? I'm like, people want to work. Certainly there's a portion that's maybe a little less motivated or motivated by other things. That's always going to be that dynamic. That's humanity. But the people everybody wants to hire, the person that everyone wants to hire, they have a job. Right? And it's our job in the recruitment realm to find the one or the ones who are motivated and interested to entertain other options, meaning, is the grass greener, or somebody's not taking care of me as well as I think I should be. So that person's out there. You just got to fight tooth and nail and realize, I can't get them for $15 an hour anymore. And I can't find the purple unicorn. I've got to bring in somebody who has the aptitude in addition to a base level of experience.
I'm happy that you touched on this idea that because we do hear, people just don't want to work, right? And I know one of your mantras is like, you got to be recruiting every day. And, the person you want to hire, actually somebody else also wants to hire them. And you should have that mindset with somebody that you're pulling through a recruiting process, that, their experience of your culture starts from the moment you have a connection with them, or maybe even before that, and continues throughout the hiring and onboarding process. Can you comment a little on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we in our a lot world, we talk a lot about candidate experience, both on our end and who we talk to and how we communicate with them, start to finish.
Mhm.
And finish could be finding a job. Obviously, that's a success point that we all want. Some of it may be letting them know, hey, you didn't get that job, and here's a little feedback why. Somebody else had better skills that matched what somebody was looking for and better in somebody else's lens, but it doesn't make you a bad candidate.
Mhm.
So that candidate experience, it starts before they've even applied. It's that entertaining the job search and what's important to me as the job seeker and who has those threads. We talk about the culture identities, the archetypes, like
Yep.
your every person, Dunkin' Donuts, your Patagonias as your explorers, right? So that person has a mindset of what they're looking for in an organization, and they start pinpointing, where are my friends working, where are my relatives working, and what are those identities for the things that I value that I'm going to find in an organization. And they start to find you and know about you as an identity. And again, from the Alliant side, we talk about that brand identity quite a bit, because you have to know who you are
Mm.
in order to bring the people into that organization. You have to know your culture identity. So that onboarding experience, that culture piece that people need to tie and connect to, starts from day one, and it goes through the entire process, the interview process. So if you're an organization that you take 6 weeks to make a hiring decision, you have to calculate you're going to lose 75% of those folks that were interested because somebody else moved faster.
Mm.
And so you go through that interview stream, your hiring managers, do they all sing the same tune? The onboarding paperwork, how many steps and how complicated you make things or not complicated you make things for them to get them to the process and touch points. So there's a lot to it. And it is something that's very, that employer brand is front and center. And if you can't commit to that, you find the baby steps that you can and shorten it. It's like an operational efficiency thing, shorten up the elements. If you can't get the branding power, meaning you don't have the ability to do a full marketing campaign,
Mhm.
shorten up the onboarding process, make it, there's much more inside your organization that you can just talk about in person or on video like we are.
Mhm. I'm struck by a couple of things. One is how much a candidate, someone who's seeking a new position, already is curious about the culture of an organization. And I'm imagining that you hear a lot more from potential candidates poking at how do I understand what this culture is. Also, that they already have an impression, right? If you've called them about a job, it's either an organization they're already familiar with, or it's one they've started to research. And so what we like to say in branding is like, you've got a brand, whether you built it with intention or not. And, so I know when you're saying employment brand, you're referring to that specific initiative of focusing on that employment brand. But I'm thinking, that process, that onboarding process is also part of your brand. It's like the brand is sort of every experience that this candidate is going to have with you is creating an impression, is creating connection, or maybe creating some resistance if it's not, carefully thought through.
Yeah, I think of a certain over the airways radio subscription model where the experience that users have, and you can Google this all you want, they get you in,
Mhm.
but you have no negotiating power until you tell them I'm leaving. No, I'm really leaving. No, I'm really, really leaving. Oh, do you want a discount? We'll give you this. Like,
Mhm.
why didn't you just give me that on the front end? That's the candidate experience that we're talking about. Give
Yeah.
them the information. That we run into this conversation about sharing salary ranges.
Uh-huh.
Why wouldn't you want a candidate to know that this fits in their bucket? Do you need
Uh-huh.
to say the full range? No, but give them an idea. All right, if it's a $60,000 plus or minus 10,000, tell them it's around 60,000. Right? You're going to get people who want 100. You can't shake that. You're also going to get folks who don't have that experience to substantiate that, and they just got to grow to that. But it gives you at least a target point. Why
Mm.
wouldn't you want that out there to show that I'm a transparent company? I want to know what you're going to. I want you to know what you're going to earn
Yeah.
versus being completely in the dark and not sharing any of that. I know there's places that do it and they have their reasons for it. my
Here,
personal.
here in Colorado, there's some rules around it. Now there's a law that you have to be transparent with salary. And I think it's an interesting, I think there's just a lot of interesting things happening as companies really put their heads around how do we solve this talent shortage? How do we recruit for culture fit? And how, I'm going to say, do we retain? And I want to shift a little my question to you, because you're sitting in a launch and you're recruiting hat on, you're sitting at the front line seeing company to company to company, how did they present their brand? What's that onboarding experience like? And I think this is where you've started to see, oh, wow, I could help them with this thing called culture. And is that the genesis of Build Better Culture?
It's definitely a big part of it. You know, my stance with engaging your employee base is the bulk of them are on the front lines. And in my opinion, when we think about that 80-20 rule, where you're going to spend your time, I liken it to looking at your frontline leaders. You can have a big impact influencing how they do things, what their understanding is, and how they influence the people that are working in that frontline trench, whether it's a grocery store, fast food, office environment, government agency, municipality. That frontline leadership and teaching them how to connect to what that culture is so valuable. And so you hear things about what goes on in certain organizations, and it gives you ideas. Sometimes it's ideas for social media posts, and that's great to kind of say, hey, here's some of the things we can concentrate on, or here's a case study, or here's a vignette. But in direct application, it lets you see, here's an area you could change, make a small tweak. Yes, it's a longer game to train folks. It's not a lunch and learn. It's not a let me buy a box and get this done in 30 minutes.
Yeah.
I can hear the manufacturing supervisors in my head thinking, where am I going to find time for this? I'm like, you don't find time. You take something off and you put this in. It's like in New York State, we have mandatory harassment training. Every year you go through an hour-long session. You have to do it, and you have to be paid for it. While this isn't the same thing, but the concept it fits in that realm where you have to drop it into the schedule.
And we're talking now about developing leaders.
Developing, absolutely.
And if I'm just tying it through, it's like I've gone through a hiring process, I've brought somebody in, and now one way that they're really going to be experiencing here, what it's like here, is through that leadership experience. Who are they reporting to? So one of the focuses that you have at Build Better Culture is developing those leadership.
Right. And a lot of it comes to the communication skills. We go through, and I use CultureTalk for that leadership assessment. Let this person know who they are. Let them start to understand, here's what makes my people tick and how I communicate with them and how that might steer them away from me or draw them towards me, so that I can better influence and collaborate with them versus give marching orders. This is how you have to do stuff and blah, 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 blah. And, you see those, and those folks are part of the market. Hopefully you get away from that and folks are a bit more open-minded to learning and growing and doing things a little bit differently. But it's a long game mind shift in their learning and development tracks. And if you can add a little bit, and I was spoiled. When I was in publishing, I worked for a company called Cengage. And at the time there was a guy, Paul Kelly, he led their learning and development program. And so he set the bar for me as far as, yeah, I love this stuff. I could eat, breathe, sleep, everything. Management training, turn them into leaders, help them develop folks, and those folks will rise and they'll go on and they'll do great things. And you won't get all of them, but if you can affect whatever percentage more than you were the day before, and again, back to that frontline leader analogy, when they were impacting 10% more or 15% more of their frontline employees, how much more productive is that employee base? Because that's a trickle down. Just as bad news makes people sour and angry and all of that, the good stuff helps just as much. It boosts productivity, boosts morale, it makes people happier to be at work, because who wants to be around a sour Sally? You'd rather be around the happy Harry.
Yeah, we sometimes say our state of being is contagious. And I love that you're even sharing your own learning experiences early in your career, because to me, in a lot of ways, investing in somebody's personal development, their leadership development, that's kind of engagement 101, right? Like, yeah, I now feel like you've invested in me, and now I'm more invested in you. I'd love to talk a little bit about how you use the framework of archetype by delving into an example. So you said, I want that leader to know who they are. All right. So using an assessment to help somebody look at themselves and develop self-awareness. How does that help? Like, give me an example, maybe of even one of your own archetypes, and how your knowing your patterns, if you will, has impacted how you show up.
So two big elements for me that show up in my leadership coaching style is my caregiver. I'm watching my ums.
All right, we'll watch them together. I've got them.
Right. It's just strikes you, and you have to make those pauses and all that public speaking nonsense. The caregiver piece comes through for me in trying to be vested in what's going to make this person better. How am I going to help them become better at whatever they want to focus in on? And then that creator aspect is one of my other high scoring archetypes, where the idea generation, it's kind of like the squirrel crossing the road. It's like, oh no, this, that, the other. And you can't see it if you're just listening, but it's literally the squirrel going across the road. They never know which way they're going. And I find that those two elements with me, when I listen to pain points or learning opportunities with leaders, I've got one who's an every person who I sit with every couple of months, and we just chat about different things going on. And I remember she's an every person. We've got to draw both the strengths and the shadow sides of that from her trying to be everything and please everything. Like, some point you've got to call this person out for what their accountabilities are, and you walk through those examples, help them come to their own conclusions and so forth. I've got another one who's a high ruler hero type, another one who's a high sage type, and so you try and hit those buzz points. And like, especially, when you can pinpoint on a sage, very data centric, need to have all this information, and it's that analysis paralysis example that we talk about. All right, you have to recontextualize and give them different lens to think about. All right, this is your sage driving this process, or this is your hero, or this is your ruler driving this decision making thinking, or this exercise that you're going through. And we talk about our CultureTalk trainings, and Cindy Atley using her, what would it look like? How would it feel if you drew on this? And so I use those examples to help them realize, oh, there's another side to this. And if I just put some context behind it, then
I was going to use the word context. Because as you're rolling through these examples, I'm thinking, I think knowing your patterns gives context to why a particular situation is going the way it is, or why you're addressing it the way you're addressing it, or experiencing it the way you're experiencing it. I share with you, I have high caregiver as well and high creator as well. And so it's very easy but for people who are newer to archetype, I think even just going, oh, you start to hear the names of these patterns, and you either say, oh my God, that's me. Like, I definitely have that, like, ooh, new idea. Can't keep track, can't get them all started at once. So if you're listening in and you experience that kind of thinking, you might be a person who has that high creator. I love how you're talking about how you draw on both the strengths of caregiver, which is like this really vested interest in another person. What do they need? How are they going to grow? Can I mentor them? And combining it with this creator problem solver, like, oh, I hear this, that this person needs. And now I've got all these new ideas maybe to help them bring into their awareness. It feels very powerful.
It's tempting also, the shadow side of that, I will say, in that context.
Yeah.
The caregiver of me wants to support this person, listen to everything that they have to say, and carry them through that to help them with their own solution. But then my squirrel brain creator, as I call it, is like, I've got a solution. I've got to solve this for you. And it's just, be quiet, Tom. Keep that thought to yourself.
Totally. It's like balancing these different tendencies that you have and becoming, I feel like once you become aware of them, I've had people like say, gosh, this is like better than any therapy I've ever had, because suddenly I'm seeing the pattern, and I'm seeing, I'm seeing sometimes, I don't want to go there. I need to pull back out of that, my natural reaction to this situation. It's interesting because I know also at Build Better Culture. So one area where you're supporting clients is they need to hire, but maybe also they need to develop some bench strength. They need to develop some people that are at their organization already to rise into leadership positions. There's another element I know you offer in team building. And I'd love to just talk a little bit about how you're using archetypes in CultureTalk, what you're seeing in that realm.
I think it's fascinating to look at the team aspects. Doing some teamwork allows you to see how, or allows others within that team structure to see how everybody vibes, how they connect with their archetypes or don't. Sometimes it just doesn't speak to them and they follow a different path, and maybe the score isn't necessarily exactly in tune. But my more recent example would lend itself towards a group where you have someone who's a high ruler and is, prior to going through some exercises, folks felt like this person was your bully, they're over aggressive on some things. And when you provide that context to let them see that, no, this person's coming from a good place and here's why, and this is their ruler speaking up, both in the good and the strength and the shadow part of it. But if you start to think about this is their personality and how they function, you get a better picture and a better lens and a better level of patience and understanding for how they communicate. And so the personal side of it, where your instinct would be like, oh, they're so mean. No, they're not, right? This is their ruler coming up from a good place where they're trying to be helpful and set process and set things in very, very strict function because this works and they know it and they believe it and they're passionate about it. So you do have some of that. And that's one of the beauty parts of the team engagement activities is you have 3, 4, 5, 6 people interpreting, and the lights are going off, like the light bulb, poof. And you're like, oh, I get it. Now I see it.
Yeah.
That's the realization. You've made the connection. Now you can kind of take that group to the next level. You have to reinforce with some regularity, but it's really neat to see and experience.
So I'm stepping out of feeling like you're personally, whatever. It's not personal. If I can understand that this is part of the pattern and that pattern is driven for something positive. And so now it's like, oh, I see. You're not just telling me what to do. You've got in mind. Tom and I are talking about the ruler pattern. You have in mind, what does success look like for the whole group? And you are going to create a sense of responsibility and accountability first for yourself to get us all across the finish line. I mean, that is ruler energy at its best. But if you don't have it, right? Because sometimes the energy that we don't come by as naturally, we experience more of the shadow aspects of that same pattern. So
right. I liken it, my analogy to that is you have a filter when you're in your job role. You speak with your coworkers in one way, and then you get home and you speak to your family, you have a whole other identity for many folks. And so it's that lens of you get into a comfort zone with certain folks, and the filter of I need to cater this to as if I was writing a paper that was going to be out on the internet, versus here are my colleagues who know me. I don't need to explain why. They should know this, like the presumptions, the common sense, as they call it, quote unquote. It's one of those elements where you can get around that by having that understanding of where that archetype is coming from, when it's coming out, and how present it is in that person's presentation.
Yeah, it also just gives you like a framework and a language to reference. So one of the things we've seen on teams is that as we get to know each other archetypes. Yes, we develop more of that compassion, more of that understanding for each other, but also we have like a language so that like if somebody's ruler is coming on a little too aggressive, or if somebody's creator's got too many squirrels going on, other people on the team can go, hey, love your creator, Tom, but right now it's distracting us from X. Or, hey, love your ruler and how it helps us get things done, but can you just tone it? Can you soften a little bit? And again, it becomes like not personal, like there's like less judgment about behavior and more understanding and acceptance of the strengths of the pattern as well.
Right. And it's not to say that somebody being a jerk can continue to be a jerk. No, you've got to hold those folks
Jerks
accountable.
are not allowed. Right.
This is
no jerk, no, you know what, award.
right. It's having an even playing field of dialogue and understanding. And there's a little, some compassion element to it. Just taking the time, let me hear you out and where you're coming from. It's being what we would call, again, common sense language, being an adult. My adult is different from the next person's adult because they grew up in a different house, different friends, different neighborhood, different part of the country or world. So, Libby Carino is an attorney in this area, and she did a presentation that I watched some 5-6 years ago, and she talked about that common sense element. It's not common. We all think that, yes, putting shoes on the same way is common. Okay, maybe for us, but in parts of the world where they don't have shoes or they don't have laces and they only have Velcro, is it different? Probably. So again, context, as we said.
Yeah. I think context is going to be the takeaway. I want to draw us back and then close us out. One of the things when we promoted this conversation is I said, Tom is going to give us some practical advice. And what I'm hearing so far in terms of, you're talking in terms of the employment brand, in terms of, a focus on culture, building the leaders, letting the team's dynamics start to sort itself out as the long game, right? But you also said earlier that there's little tweaks. And I just would love for you to maybe lead us home with like, what are some of those little tweaks that you see organizations having the opportunity to make work a little bit better?
I talked about this a little bit in my keynote the other day with regard to what you know, what you don't know, and what you don't know, you don't know. And if folks would embrace a little bit more that they don't know everything, there's a space in their brain, probably a big space for most of us.
Big empty space.
Yeah. Right. It's that, they say we only use 5% or 10% of our brain. I'm like, I believe it. But if we acknowledge as leaders in organizations, there's this opportunity for us to change how we do things. Just because it's always been done that way is the saddest excuse to continue doing that way. Yes, if you're being successful, contain some elements. I'm a fan of breaking things. I break things all the time. You have to, but if you had to kind of wrangle it around, a couple of things is ask people questions, ask them not only functionally what they do tied to their expectations of what they do on a day-to-day basis, but ask them how they feel about it, how they connect to it, how they think they're going to get there. I like to ask both my kids and the folks that work with me, what's the next step? What's the next question I'm going to ask you? Because as they get to know you, there's a cadence to it. Okay, tell me more. Tell me more. Describe for me this. And you walk through a certain set of examples. But if I have one colleague, she calls herself Tom with hair. For those of you that are listening, you don't realize I don't have any hair. So yeah, there's a wig in the office that sometimes will come out and it's just for giggles. But there's moments where you can walk folks through those scenarios to understand, all right, here's how I'm thinking. Here's how you're thinking. But there's this middle ground. And what can I embrace? And you're only going to get there by asking questions, actively listening, and then doing something with it. Sometimes those ideas aren't going to come to fruition. But if you're not entertaining the conversations, and it's not to say that every single thing requires a conversation, but in those one-on-one moments, once a week, once every other week, you have to have some of those open conversations of how can we do this better? What are we doing right? What could we improve? It's the stay interview philosophy. What could we improve or change? What could we test out? Kind of an R&D mindset. Maybe we try this and it breaks and we go back to the old way. Maybe we try it and it works and we have a better way of doing things. and we're more efficient, or we learned lessons from it breaking about 6 of the 10 things here worked. Let's build on those and build a better model, build a better culture. Wink, wink, nod, nod. See what I did there?
There you go. And we land on build better culture. I love it. So some takeaway of staying curious about your culture, about your employment experience, and asking questions. Tom, it's great to visit with you. Tom is one of our Culture Talk certified partners. You probably picked that up along the way. If you would like, he does keynotes, he's got his consulting business, and he also is part of Alant. And the best way to reach out to Tom is via LinkedIn. So you should see even right here his LinkedIn profile where you can grab his contact information. And if you're curious about Culture Talk and this archetype conversation that we're having about making culture tangible, and all the aspects to that, we do have a certification program. Our next session kicks off June 1st. So feel free to message me, and I'm happy to share more about that. So in the meantime, a happy weekend to everybody who's already headed into the weekend, and a great rest of the day and week to you, Tom. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cynthia.